Hey, how's it going? This is Greg with howtobuildgames.com, where we teach you how to build games from scratch with Unity 3D. This video is a continuation of the Unity 4.3 2D series. If you have not watched the previous video yet, check out the link over here. You want to watch that one first, or this one is going to make no sense. This video picks up where that one left off. So we're going to go ahead and move into Unity now. This is going to be a preview of what we're going to be building over the next couple of lessons. A lot of people have said, hey, why don't you show us what we're going to be building before we do it? And honestly, I don't know before we do it sometimes. Sometimes I plan a little further out. I'm still getting the hang of all this. Anyway, this is what we're going to be building. You got a bucket at the bottom. You got your score at the top. I hit play. You're basically moving your bucket around trying to catch these falling objects, the same ones that we had before. Yeah. So, yeah, they fall in the bucket or they don't. If they fall in the bucket, you get a point. If they don't, you don't. You get the idea. So, it doesn't look super fancy, and we will fix that in probably, I guess, the fourth lesson in this series. We're going to get it working and up to this point. Then we're going to go back and change the graphics out and make it look nicer. I'm going to drag this window over here by clicking the tab and dragging it over. You can do that just to kind of show you what's happening behind the scenes. So you've seen the gameplay, basic gameplay window over here. But I'm going to show you what's happening over here behind the scenes as well. So if I hit play now, you see this spawner object is actually dropping things. And so that's one of the things we're going to be doing as well. And of course you can speed it up, slow it down, things like that. Now I'm watching over here, so and you could do different things. You could pull the camera back so that the user could have a better idea and see what's there, or show somebody at the top dropping things, whatever you want. There's a lot of flexibility. But that's basically what we're going to do. We're going to build it so that when things drop in the bucket, they disappear. You get a point. This is so that if things don't drop in the bucket, they hit this and then they get destroyed, which is important. You don't want the physics engine running on 800 objects that the bucket has missed that are falling infinitely into space. That would be bad for performance. We got a score. We got a spawner object up here with some different objects, and it's picking them randomly, how much time between them, the speed, the distance that this is moving back and forth, and all that. So that's what we're going to be building. Let's go ahead and get back to the lesson where we left off from the last lesson. Is basically here. We've got this. You hit that, and the things fall into the bucket. That's all we got, which is fine. That's where this one picks up. And again, if you haven't watched the previous lesson, you should do that first. Otherwise, this will not make much sense. Alright, so first we're going to add a little bit of structure to our assets. I'm going to right click over here, make one folder, call it scripts. Right click over here, make another one, called scenes. This just helps give us a little bit of structure. Everything is alphabetical. That's also the case up here. You can always put numbers or underscores if you want things to float to the top of the list. I do that a lot. So I'll leave that for you to try and see on your own, but it works, I promise. So we've got our scene, our lesson 2D final. I'm going to go ahead and drag that into the scenes folder. Double click on that. Double click here, which is probably not necessary, but since I just moved it, I think it's a good idea. I'd rather take that extra little step and prevent problems than fix them later. So now with this scene loaded, which is where we stopped in the first lesson, I'm going to go ahead and save the scene out as something else. So again, we've got our art, scenes, and scripts in our current project. So I'm going to go there. I'm going to call it Part 2 lesson 2D. Now I'm going to go ahead and double click on that and load that one. You can always look up here and see the name of the current scene that you've got open. Part 2 lesson 2D is what we want to see. And you can duplicate scenes and save scenes out all day long if you'd like. It's really not a big deal. It's not terribly resource heavy. They are not included in the final build of the project unless you tell it to do so. So that can be a great way to duplicate a scene, try something out. If it doesn't work, you've got nothing lost, and you can always save that off as an, make another folder over here called, underscore test scenes or something like that, and then it's always going to be at the top. I do that a lot. And then as I get test scenes, I can put them in there. I can leave them in there. If I come up with some kind of a new idea, I can leave them in there. The only caveat in all that is that your scripts, just because you duplicate a scene does not mean the scripts are going to be changed at all. So if you duplicate a scene and go and change some other things, you probably need to change your script names in there as well if you want to keep it. And a lot of times as I'm building something, I'll find something neat. I'll rename the script, rename the scene, stick that over, and revisit it some later date. So for now, though, go ahead and delete that. So we've got our Part 2 Lesson 2D. There's two main things we're going to do right now. We're going to add the spawner, and we're going to add the destroy and score type script to the bucket. So since things are already falling, let's go ahead and add the thing that will remove these objects and add the score before we do anything else. So I'm going to go up here to game object. I'm going to create an empty one. I'm going to move it roughly down here. I am going to give it a component, a physics 2D component, because remember everything here is 2D. We do not want it to have a rigid body, otherwise it would fall. We want to have a box collider. We don't want it to fall by itself. If it had a rigid body component on there, it would. So now I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see it. Placing and positioning is not super important. What is super important is selecting isTrigger. If isTrigger is not selected, then, and I'll show you, when we hit play, things are just going to hit that box and they're going to collide with it just like anything else in the game that's a collider. That is not what you want. We want to do isTrigger. What that's going to do is say, when you get to this, don't collide with it and bounce off it or land on top of it, but actually go through it, and then in the script we will go in and say, okay, hey, if it's a trigger, if they enter the trigger, if they stay in the trigger, this is what we want to do. Now that I've selected isTrigger, and you can watch and see, things will fall down into the bucket like they did before, because right now we don't have any script in there that says on the trigger remove this object and add a point. So let's do that next. But I just wanted to show you that so that if all your stuff is not working and it's piling up on top of the bucket, then you need to go check this. It's probably not checked. I'm also going to give it another name. We're going to call this bucket trigger. So with that, I'm going to go over here to the scripts, right click here, create a C# script, call it destroy object and add point, something like that. And again, you can call it whatever, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to pick my bucket trigger. I'm going to click and drag that over there. So now it's there. Now I'm going to double click here to open up MonoDevelop so we can edit the script. Now we don't need start and update. It's a really good practice to delete these as soon as you open them up, because update is called once per frame whether there's anything in there or not. And if you get a lot of objects that have this update routine in them, even if they're empty, it is going to affect your performance eventually. and it can really be a problem if you have one thing in some update somewhere that you forgot about, and you've got to go check a whole bunch of different update statements. It's a really good practice to delete them both. You don't have to delete the start one if you don't want to. That has more use more often than update. Typically, you're only going to want to have a few update routines functioning throughout the scripts where you've got some kind of a game object loop and things like that going on. You don't want 8,000 different things updating and stuff like that. Start is more useful because it will help initialize this, but again, as I've said before, if we need those, we can always put them back. So I start out by deleting those, pretty much always, I think, anyway. Now that we've got those removed, we're going to add a variable. We're going to call it myScore, and we're going to give it an initial value of 0. It is an integer, or a whole number, as the rest of the world knows them. We're going to do a basic function called onTriggerEnter2D. That is 2D is so important to have in there. Now, the other thing we're going to do here, we want a collider 2D, and we're going to call that collision object. Go ahead and close brackets. Now, if we were working with 3D, it would be onTriggerEnter and collider collision object. That 2D part is because we're dealing with 2D physics, and this actually tripped me up because I didn't know there were new things for the 2D stuff. So I learned something there. I'll just leave that there for reference. Basically what this says is, well, when it enters the trigger, figure out what has entered the trigger. That's going to be a collider 2D object. We're going to call it in this script collision object. So now we're going to say, okay, destroy collision object, there it is, dot game object. And that's basically just saying remove the object from gameplay. The other thing we're going to do is add a point. And so you say myScore equals myScore plus 1. Or you can also do myScore plus plus, which is in either one is going to add a point to the player's score. Do a debug log statement that will show the player's score. So we're going to do debug.log, which is again going to put it out in the console. My score is quote plus my score. It's very important to have that capitalized. If you don't have that capitalized and you do a lowercase s there, not going to work. Points. Alright, and you'll notice that MonoDevelop puts the quoted parts in orange, which is handy to help you remember that, that is so that if you leave out a quote, and if you see a quote that's open but not empty, and so if I started over here and started doing some other stuff, this isn't going to work because there's quote missing. So now that I remove the quote, the little squiggly underline that says there's an error there is gone. We're good to go. Alright, so again, recap, we're going to initialize a whole number called myScore, or an integer as we call them. Initialize it with 0. When something enters the 2D trigger, we're going to send a reference to that object called collision object for our purposes, and then we're going to destroy the game object of that collision object, which will destroy the whole thing and remove it from the scene, and then add a point to the score and then say, hey, my score is X amount of points. So I'm going to hit Control S to save it, Command S on the Mac, click back over here, see a little thing down there for a moment, it's recompiling, it's good to go. There's no errors, there's nothing showing up down here. Errors would show up down here in red, even if you are on the project. Your console output shows up down here, although it only does one line at a time. So it's good to check this. I'll probably split these up at some point where you can see that all the time. You know what? Let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to click right there and I'm going to drag it to there. That's going to be way more useful because we're not going to have enough stuff that's really long over here. Now we've got our console on screen all the time. I really like it that way. And you can drag and move things around and save the layout and all that. We're not going to get into all that. But you know, if you've got a different aspect ratio monitor or two monitors, it's really handy to be able to customize your layout the way that you want it to be. Since there's a star up here, that means I have not saved my scene yet, so I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S to save the scene. And so what should happen is when these things hit this box collider trigger, remember from the script, it should destroy them and it should add a point and it should tell us what that point or what the current point value is. So let's hit play, see if it works. There's 1, 2, 3. There they go. And so as they hit that, they went away and it added points. That is what we want. This is a good thing. So next, let's add the spawner. So I'm using my mouse wheel to back out a little bit more. I'm going to use an Alt middle mouse click to get to the point where I can have some room to put a spawner object up here. I'm going to create another game object. I'm going to move this guy. I'm going to click in this blue area, which is going to constrain it to the two axes that I can see, so I can move it either way as opposed to just clicking on the green arrow and then it just moves up and down. So anyway, I'm going to put it about there, and we're going to call this spawner. Now if you click off of that object while you're in scene mode, you're not going to be able to get to it again. You're not going to find it again until you go and click over in your hierarchy. That can be a pain when you've got a lot of things going on. So this is going to be your new best friend. Click on that and you can pick a icon. This is basically a representation in your scene view of this game object. So we'll pick the orange one. You've got some different options, some big ones, some small ones. You can even click other and pick your own picture. So if you want, you know, a player icon, the player start position, or all the spawn points to look a certain way, or your lights to look a certain way, you can use your own graphics there. Very, very, very handy stuff. And so now when I'm moving around in my scene, I can see that's where the spawner is, and I can click on it, and it's a whole lot easier to get to. So that's a really useful thing right there. Now we're going to add a script to the spawner that actually will spawn something. I'm going to go ahead and Control S to save, and we are going to make another script. I'm going to right click. I'm going to call this one spawn one object. Going to double click on that, and then right after I said I never do it, well, I'm going to do it. I'm actually going to leave the start and update, but only because we need them both here. First, I'm going to add a couple of variables, a private variable and some public variables. So I'm going to do a private vector3, and that is just basically the XYZ coordinates, and they're stored as floating points. Don't let that scare you off. Everything in 2D or 3D space is stored in XYZ. This is no exception. So the vector3 is, we're going to call it start position, which is what it's going to actually store. I'm going to make a public float called move speed and just set that to 1f, which is the same as 1.0 f. You need that f in there so that it knows it's a floating point number. If it's not there, if it's just 1.0, Unity actually interprets that as a double, which is a double precision floating point number, which is not really relevant at any point probably in your future unless you're doing much more complicated stuff. So anyway, all you need to know is 1.0f or 1f. If you can do 1.5f. That's fine. If it's just a single number, 1f is fine. I'm going to make another public float, call it move distance, and we'll do 4f, something like that. And lastly, a public game object, and we're going to call this randomGO. And again, anything in Unity is a game object. And this is the name that we're giving it, randomGO, that we can use to deal with that game object down here in the scripts. And that'll make more sense in a minute. So the first thing I'm going to do is do a start position, which is a reference to our start position variable up here. And we're going to say transform position. The transform is kind of the core of how Unity keeps up with the object. The transform position is going to give us the starting position of this game object. Because we didn't preface it with any other game object, it's going to give us the transform position of this game object. So basically what this is going to do is when the script starts, we want to store the start position. That'll be important in a few minutes to keep up with the start position. The next thing that we want to do is say game object my obj equals instantiate, and we're going to instantiate the randomGO as a game object. Now that probably looks really confusing. It's not nearly as confusing as it looks. So we're saying I've got something I want to call my obj. It is of the type of game object because we're using C#, and so you have the type and then the name. In all these cases, the type and then the name whenever you're dealing with variables. And so just like we said, int my score, now we're doing game object my obj. Instantiate means we want to create another instance of it on the fly. And in C#, you have to again go back and clarify that I want this thing to be a game object. And so this will always match that. That's just because if you don't do it, it won't work. The reason why you have to do it is because over here you're saying, okay, I've got a thing, it's going to be a game object, and you can do this, but you want to clarify over here that it is a game object, which is what this is expecting. Otherwise you'll get errors and it just won't work. Once we've done that, we're going to say my obj transform position equals transform position. And so now we're saying, okay, with this new game object that I just made, that we just spawned or instantiated, I want its position, again, the position of that object, to be the position of this object. What that's going to do is that is going to create a copy of this object at the location of whatever this script is attached to, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Move back over here. You can watch it recompile. This is assigned but never used. You'll get these sometimes. That's okay. We are going to use it. We just haven't used it yet. So now I click on my spawner. I make sure that spawn one object is over here. Now, random game object, this is going to be a game object. Now, I could take one of these objects in the scene, the bat, the cat, or the hat, and I did not actually mean for that to rhyme. I could take one of those, I could take this bat and drag it into the random geo, because you see right now it has none, but it's expecting a game object. That's what that means. I could take the one of these objects and move it over there, but, well, I'll show you. So if we take the turkey and move it over there and hit play, then these things fall, and that falls. And you go, oh, okay, great, that's what I want. But the problem is that if you say, okay, well, I don't want this turkey to show up, I just want the one that comes out of here, and you deactivate it. So we still got the cat and the bat. Or, well, let's go ahead and deactivate those as well. And by clicking this, I'm basically rendering it almost as if it's not in the scene anymore. So it's not quite deleted, because I can still go back over here and click it back on. But for the purposes of the scene, it's not there anymore. But the problem is that now that I have turned off the turkey with the black hat, it's not going to spawn anything. Well, I mean, technically it did. Technically it spawned a clone of this empty thing that is not active, and therefore the physics and everything else isn't active. So you can do that, and sometimes you will want to spawn a specific object from the scene. And if I click on this, it's going to show me, hey, this is what we're spawning. This is what you picked. So that's not quite what we want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and turn these back on. And this is pretty cool. So those are back on. I'm going to save my scene. I'm going to go back to my main assets thing here, right click and make a new folder called Prefabs. Prefabs are basically game objects that have a certain set of parameters saved with them, and we can work with them. Now, there are some other ways to spawn objects later on that you don't have to make as prefabs, but that gets a little more complicated in how they're saved and how you call them, and they got to be in a certain folder and all that stuff. So we're not going to do that. We're just going to take these simple objects that we've got now and turn them into prefabs. So we got the turkey with the black hat, and over here in the scene view, I'm going to hit F just to find it in the scene. So there it is, and it'll take the position and the scale and everything, all this stuff, and save that. So I'm in the prefabs folder. I'm going to grab the turkey and drag it down into there. And I've just made a prefab. You'll notice this is turned blue, which means it's prefab. We'll do the same thing with the cat. And again, it's turned blue. And again with the bat. And so now they're all blue. So now I can delete these from the scene. I can use my mouse wheel to zoom back out, pan around a little bit. Now on my spawner, it's missing the game object because it was tied to the one in the scene that we just deleted. Now I can take that turkey with the black hat and drag it over here. Now when I click it here, it's going to reference that. Now when I run it, it's going to work just fine, because that turkey had all its parameters on. And you can click over here and change things about the prefab. So if we wanted to take the scale, for example, and change it to 1.77 instead of 0.77. Now we hit play, we get a very wide turkey because we have changed the prefab, which, if there's none in the scene and you've got things calling directly from here, any changes to the prefab are going to affect all of the objects that are called. So I'm going to go back, change that to 0, hit play again, and there you go. There's our normal turkey. Now we've got a basic spawner object. We've got something that catches it. It even gives us a point. Alright, so I think I'm going to show you one more thing before we quit. Before I do that, though, let me remind you again, go to howtobuildgames.com, sign up on the email list, and that's how you get access to the source code, the art assets, the packages, and all of this stuff. That is what you want. The source code, it has more comments and things like that in some cases where I've gone in and explained things in more depth than I really can in a video easily. It's a good thing. And you get my email address if you want to send me a letter, as several people have, and I really appreciate the feedback. I'm still working out some kinks with the email system, but I'm planning to respond to everybody very soon. Anyway, what I'm going to show you is how to bring one more object. You may note in the original, this is where we're going with it, I showed you 4 objects. I showed you a snowman that was new. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to add in one more prefab, being a snowman. And we're gonna drag him in. This is just, I've got a ping, ignore everything else there. So I've got my art folder selected over here. I've got a standard ping over here. I'm going to go ahead and just drag that from Windows Explorer, and it also works on Finder in the Mac, right into my art folder. So now that's in there. From there, I'm just going to drag that puppy right up into the scene, and there it is. Now it's a little big, and if you're wondering, that is a snowman that I built with my family a few years ago. Anyway, that's why it looks a little different than the others. But again, as I said, we're going to make this look nice after we get everything else put into place. So for now, I'm going to go ahead. This guy's way too big to fit in there, so I'm going to hit R to scale him down. I know you might think that R would rotate, but W, E, and R are the 3 keys in a row to move, rotate, and scale, and you get used to it after a while. So I'm going to hit W now to move. Actually, he's still too big. I'm going to scale him down a little bit more. If you want, you could just click over here and 0.5 and tab across the different ones. So now we need to add a couple of components. We're going to add the physics 2D. Remember, we're going to add the rigid body so that he falls, has gravity affecting him. Then we're going to add the polygon collider so that, as I zoom in with my mouse wheel, so that a basic outline of him is made. And again, this is just a ping taken out of a picture. I went in Photoshop and erased the background and everything else. So now we've got our wacky little snowman, and when I hit play, he should drop just like everything else does. And he drops into the bucket and we get a point. Turkey drops and we get a point. So we're almost there. Now I'm going to take him, I'm going to go back to prefabs. I'm going to drag him into the prefab section. Now that everything is set up, then I can delete him. Then I can go back over to the spawner, and remember, if we click on this and it shows us the one out of the prefab section, take the snowman instead, drag it in there. And as I pointed out in the comments, the move speed, the move distance, and the random game object, because we made those variables public, we can manipulate them here, and that'll be much more useful in the next section. So anyway, for now, we've got our random game object that is our new snowman prefab that we just made. So now when I hit play, it should spawn a snowman. He should drop, and there you go. And we got a point. So that's where we're going to stop for today. Please make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you like it. Hit like down below. Like the video, subscribe. That's how I know that people want me to keep making these. Sign up on the email list. That'll get you the source code and the art that I'm using. And that's also a good way to show your support. So, thanks so much. The next lesson or two will probably continue in this series. This Unity 4.3 2D series has proven very popular. And I've also got a fair bit of stuff planned out on it. So the next lesson or two will be in this series. I'm still going to try to do them every couple of weeks. I might do one of these a little bit sooner. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching, and have a good one.